Trespassing Karen tries to sue me after tripping on my yard. I live in a nice suburban neighborhood in Colorado, where I've owned my home for the past 8 years. I'm pretty proud of my yard. I've put a lot of work into making it look good without going overboard. I've got some nice decorative rock gardens, solar-powered path lights, and my pride and joy, a collection of hand-painted garden gnomes that my late grandmother left me. Yeah, I know garden gnomes aren't everyone's cup of tea, but they mean a lot to me, and they're actually pretty valuable antiques. Enter Karen, not her real name, obviously. She moved into the house 2 doors down about a year ago, and right from the start, she made it her mission to be the neighborhood's self-appointed property values guardian. You know the type, always complaining about other people's mailbox colors or grass length at the H.O.A. meetings. At first, I barely interacted with her. She'd give me these disapproving looks when I was working in my yard, but I just ignored them. Then came the passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox about how my lawn decorations were bringing down property values. I kept throwing them away, which apparently drove her nuts. One day in April, I was working from home, I'm a software developer, when I got an alert from my security camera system. I'd installed it the previous year after someone tried to steal one of my grandmother's gnomes. The alert showed Karen actually walking onto my property, smartphone in hand, taking pictures of my yard decorations. I opened my front door and called out to her. "Excuse me, what are you doing on my property?" She jumped like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar, then immediately switched to full Karen mode. "I'm documenting code violations for the H.O.A. These tacky decorations are against regulations." I couldn't help but laugh. "First of all, you're trespassing. Second, I'm on the H.O.A. board, and there's absolutely nothing in our bylaws against garden gnomes or rock gardens. Please leave my property immediately." "How dare you speak to me that way? I'm trying to protect our neighborhood standards." She was turning that special shade of red that entitled people get when someone stands up to them. "Leave now or I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing," I said firmly. She stormed off, but not before shouting, "You'll be hearing from the H.O.A. about this." I just shook my head and went back to work. I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe she'd file some bogus H.O.A. complaint that would get dismissed, and that would be that. Boy, was I wrong. 2 days later, I got another security alert. This time, the footage showed Karen sneaking around my yard again, but this time she was moving things around, actually picking up and repositioning my grandmother's gnomes. I rushed outside, but by the time I got there, she had already hurried away. I checked my yard and found that she'd moved several gnomes into different positions, creating a weird zigzag pattern across my lawn. I was furious, but also confused. What was she trying to accomplish? The next morning, I found out exactly what her plan was. Around 8 a.m., I heard a commotion outside. I checked my security feed and saw Karen sprawled out on my front lawn, wailing like she was auditioning for a soap opera. She was lying next to one of my grandmother's gnomes, which was now knocked over. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I went outside. By this point, another neighbor had come over to help her up. "She's done this on purpose," Karen was screaming, pointing at my yard. "These hazardous decorations are placed to make people trip." I could have been killed. I kept my phone recording as I calmly said, "You mean the decorations you were moving around on my property yesterday? I have that on video, by the way." Karen's face went pale for a moment before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just walking by on the sidewalk and had to step onto your yard to avoid a dog, and these dangerous obstacles made me fall. My lawyer will be in touch." I couldn't believe it. She had actually orchestrated this whole thing, presumably to try to sue me. "Karen, you were trespassing on my property, and I have video evidence of you moving my decorations around yesterday. Also, there's no dog anywhere in sight in my current recording. We'll see what a judge has to say about this," she shouted as she limped away, still performing for her audience of confused neighbors. Sure enough, 3 weeks later, I got served with lawsuit papers. Karen was suing me for $50,000 for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and emotional distress caused by my negligently placed lawn decorations. The complaint actually claimed that I had created an attractive nuisance and failed to maintain safe conditions for pedestrians. I immediately contacted my homeowner's insurance company and forwarded them all my security footage. They assigned me a lawyer, Jessica, who turned out to be an absolute blessing. When I showed her all my documentation, the security footage, my recorded interaction with Karen after her fall, and the previous incidents of her trespassing, she actually smiled. "This is what we call a frivolous lawsuit," Jessica explained. "She's clearly staged this whole thing, and we have evidence. Not only are we going to get this dismissed, but we might be able to countersue for her trespassing and the attempted fraud." The next few months were a flurry of legal activity. Karen's lawyer, after seeing our evidence, tried to pressure her to drop the case, but she refused. She kept changing her story, first claiming she didn't remember moving the gnomes because of medical issues, then saying she was investigating safety hazards as a concerned citizen, and finally claiming that my security cameras were an invasion of her privacy. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I was nervous, but Jessica assured me we had nothing to worry about. She was right. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and zero patience for nonsense, watched our security footage with increasing disapproval. The footage clearly showed Karen's multiple trespassing incidents, her rearranging my decorations, and finally her staged fall. We also had footage showing that there was no dog present as she'd claimed. Karen's testimony was a disaster. She kept changing her story, and when confronted with the video evidence, she actually tried to argue that she had a right to enter my property because she was protecting the neighborhood. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Karen's last name," the judge said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Let me be very clear. You deliberately trespassed on private property multiple times. You tampered with someone else's possessions. Then you attempted to commit insurance fraud by staging an accident. Did you really think this would work?" Karen tried to interrupt, but the judge shut her down. "I'm dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice," the judge continued. "Furthermore, I'm granting the defendant's counterclaim for trespassing damages. You will pay $5,000 in damages for trespassing and attempting to damage valuable antique decorations, plus all legal fees incurred by the defendant." Karen burst into tears, but they weren't the fake tears from her staged fall. These were tears of humiliation and rage. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. But the judge wasn't finished. "And Mrs. Karen's last name, let me warn you, if you ever appear in my courtroom with another frivolous lawsuit like this, I will not hesitate to refer you for criminal charges. Do you understand?" Karen managed a weak, "Yes, Your Honor," before practically running from the courtroom. The aftermath was pretty satisfying. Karen had to pay my legal fees and damages, which her lawyer later told me came to almost $12,000 total. She put her house on the market the following week. Apparently, living near the neighbor who had exposed her schemes in court was too embarrassing. The best part? The H.O.A. used her case as an example to create new bylaws specifically protecting homeowners' right to display lawn decorations. They even added specific language about garden gnomes, which I found hilarious. My grandmother's gnomes still stand proudly in my yard, though now they're cemented in place, just in case any other Karens get any ideas. I also upgraded my security system with better cameras, and I make sure to wave at them whenever I'm in my yard, just in case Karen ever drives by to check on her old neighborhood. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for yourself and the importance of documentation. If I hadn't had those security cameras, this story might have had a very different ending. Instead, Karen's attempt to bully and scam me backfired spectacularly, and I ended up with a great story to share. Oh, and remember that lawyer who represented Karen. I heard through the grapevine that he now requires video evidence from potential clients before taking on slip and fall cases. I guess Karen taught him a lesson too. Update. It's been about 3 months since my original post, and I thought you all might be interested in some developments that have happened since then. First off, Karen didn't go quietly into the night after selling her house. Before she moved out, she tried one last desperate attempt at revenge. She filed a complaint with the city claiming my security cameras were violating privacy laws. The city inspector who came out took one look at my setup, confirmed everything was properly aimed at my own property, and dismissed her complaint on the spot. The inspector actually turned out to be a pretty cool guy who collects vintage lawn ornaments himself. We ended up talking for almost an hour about collectibles, and he gave me some great tips about protecting valuable outdoor decorations. He even helped me document and appraise my grandmother's gnome collection properly for insurance purposes. Turns out they're worth even more than I thought. Karen's house sold quickly. The real estate market in our area is crazy. But here's the ironic part. The new owners are a lovely retired couple who run a garden decoration business online. They specifically chose the house because they wanted a big yard to display their seasonal decoration samples. Their Halloween display last month was epic, and they're already setting up for Christmas. It's like karma decided to play interior decorator. The story of Karen's failed lawsuit has become something of a neighborhood legend. Our H.O.A. now uses the security camera footage, with faces blurred, in their new homeowner orientation presentations as an example of what not to do. They've also implemented a new dispute resolution process that requires photographic evidence for any property-related complaints, which has cut down on frivolous reports dramatically. I've gotten to know my other neighbors much better through all of this. Several of them came forward after the lawsuit to share their own Karen stories. Apparently, she'd been trying to micromanage the entire neighborhood since she moved in. One neighbor told me she'd actually measured their grass with a ruler one day. The whole experience has brought our community closer together, and we now have monthly neighborhood cookouts where we can all laugh about it. The legal aftermath had some interesting twists too. Karen's lawyer faced some professional consequences for pursuing such an obviously fraudulent case. The State Bar Association launched an investigation after our judge reported the case, and while he wasn't disbarred, he had to take additional ethics training and was put on probation. My lawyer Jessica told me he sent her a formal apology letter, acknowledging that he should have dropped the case as soon as he saw our evidence. Speaking of Jessica, she's become a good friend. She helped me set up a small business selling hand-painted garden, gnome replicas. Not of my grandmother's antiques, of course. These are my own designs. It started as a joke, but it's actually turning into a nice side hustle. I donate 10% of the profits to our local legal aid society, which helps people fight frivolous lawsuits when they can't afford representation. I did hear through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen tried to pull a similar stunt in her new neighborhood about a month ago, something about slipping on a neighbor's freshly painted porch steps. Unfortunately for her, word of her previous lawsuit had followed her. The new neighborhood's Facebook group had already shared the story as a warning, complete with links to the public court records. Her new neighbors shut down her accusations immediately and pointed to their own security cameras. She's apparently been very quiet since then. The whole experience has had some unexpected positive impacts on our community. Our Neighborhood Watch program has been revitalized, with a focus on helping neighbors set up proper security systems. We've even started a yearly yard art festival, where people can showcase their lawn decorations, no matter how quirky. The first festival is scheduled for next spring, and yes, there will be a special category for garden gnomes. My grandmother's gnomes have become minor celebrities in their own right. People actually stop to take pictures with them now, from the sidewalk of course, and I've even had offers from collectors to buy them. They're not for sale, but I did agree to let them be featured in a local magazine's article about collecting vintage garden art. The photographer made sure to capture them from their best angles, and the article included the full story of how they helped thwart Karen's lawsuit. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for the whole experience. It turned a negative situation into something that brought out the best in our community. It showed me that standing up to bullies, while scary, is always worth it. And it taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching karma do its work while you sit back and enjoy your garden gnomes. Oh, and one final detail that makes me smile. I recently installed a new garden gnome. It's holding a tiny security camera and a gavel. I call it Justice Gnome, and it watches over all the others. Sometimes you just have to keep your sense of humor about these things. Final update. 1 year later. Well, folks, I promised I'd let you know how everything turned out in the end, and wow, has this past year been interesting. First off, I want to thank everyone who's been following this crazy story and sending supportive messages. Your encouragement really helped me stay strong through all of this. Remember how I mentioned Karen had tried to pull another stunt in her new neighborhood? Well, that situation exploded in her face even worse than our lawsuit. Her new neighbors didn't just have security cameras, they had a Ring doorbell that caught her actually pouring water on their porch steps the night before her slip and fall. She didn't know about that camera, and when they showed the footage to the police, she actually got charged with attempted insurance fraud. I got called as a witness for that case, along with my lawyer Jessica. The prosecutor used our previous case to establish a pattern of behavior, and Karen ended up accepting a plea deal. She got 2 years of probation, had to pay a hefty fine, and is required to take a fraud prevention course. She also had to make a formal public apology to both me and her new neighbors. The apology was clearly forced, and she looked like she was chewing on lemons the whole time. But hey, I'll take it. The garden gnome business I mentioned in my last update has actually taken off. Jessica helped me patent my designs and set up a proper LLC. I've now got a successful Etsy shop, and 3 local garden centers carry my gnomes. The Justice Gnome design became surprisingly popular after someone shared its story on TikTok. I've sold over 200 of them. The Legal Aid Society partnership has been amazing too. We've helped 4 other homeowners fight off frivolous lawsuits similar to mine. One case even involved another slip-and-fall scammer who turned out to be a friend of Karen's. Apparently, they were part of some Facebook group where they shared tips about suing homeowners. That group got shut down after several members got investigated for fraud. Our neighborhood's first yard art festival was a huge success. We had over 500 visitors, and the local news even covered it. My grandmother's gnomes won Most Historical Collection, and I got to share their story on the evening news. The reporter loved the security camera footage angle. She said it was like Home Alone meets Judge Judy. Her words, not mine. The best part? Karen's old house has become the neighborhood's unofficial decoration central. The retired couple who bought it really went all out. They've turned the front yard into a rotating display of seasonal decorations that people drive from other towns to see. During October, they set up a Garden Gnome Protection Squad display, where all their decorative gnomes wore tiny security guard uniforms. They asked to borrow one of my grandmother's gnomes as the squad captain, and I agreed, with proper insurance and security measures, of course. Jessica and I have become close friends through all this. She's even gotten into collecting garden gnomes herself, though she specializes in what she calls legal-themed ones. Her favorite is one I custom-made for her that's wearing a tiny judge's robe and holding a list titled Garden Rules. We joke that it's the Supreme Court of Law and Justice. The H.O.A. has completely transformed too. Remember those property value complaints that started this whole mess? Our home values have actually gone up significantly since we embraced our reputation as the artistic garden community. We've even had real estate agents specifically marketing houses here to people who love unique outdoor decorating. The irony is just perfect. I've installed a little free library next to my garden, and the first book I put in it was a guide to home security systems. It keeps disappearing and reappearing. I think the neighbors are passing it around. I also added a laminated copy of the judge's decision from Karen's case. You know, just as a friendly reminder to any future troublemakers. The city inspector who helped me with the camera verification has become a regular at our neighborhood cookouts. He brings his own vintage lawn flamingos, and we've started a monthly collectors club where people can share stories and trading tips about garden decorations. Last month, someone brought in a gnome from the 1800s. It was fascinating to compare it with my grandmother's collection. I sometimes think about how differently things could have turned out if I hadn't installed those security cameras, or if I'd given in to Karen's intimidation tactics. Standing up to her wasn't easy, but it led to so many positive changes in our community. We're no longer just a neighborhood, we're a tight-knit group of people who look out for each other and celebrate our differences. The other day, I was outside setting up my latest gnome display when a car slowed down in front of my house. I tensed up for a moment thinking it might be Karen doing a drive-by, but it was just a young couple. They asked if they could take pictures of my garden for inspiration. They're closing on a house down the street next month and want to create their own unique yard art display. As I helped them plan their future garden, showing them the best spots for security cameras, just in case, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, and having a yard full of well-protected, legally documented, judge-approved garden gnomes doesn't hurt either. You know what they say, karma comes around. In trying to force her bland, restrictive vision of a perfect neighborhood on everyone else, Karen actually helped create something much better, a vibrant community where creativity is celebrated and neighbors have each other's backs. And my grandmother's gnomes still stand proud, watching over it all through their well-positioned security cameras.